Welcome to Journalist Roundtable. I'm Phil Beckman. Today we're joined by Carter Walker, a reporter with Votebeat, Lindsay Weber, a reporter with The Morning Call, and Borys Krawczeniuk, a reporter with WVIA. Borys, we're about a week and a half away from Election Day on November 5th. Do you think voters see this as an election in which there's a lot at stake?
Yes, very much so. There's a lot of enthusiasm on both sides, and polling shows that there's very few undecided voters. I think we're going to see a pretty good turnout. I don't know if we'll get to 2020, but I think there's going to be a large turnout. The mail-in balloting is a little bit down right now, but we still got more than a week to go on that too.
Lindsay, how are things looking in your area? Do you get a feel that voters are really paying attention to this election?
I mean, it's hard not to here in the Lehigh Valley. I mean, obviously, we're kind of overwhelmed with ads and mailers for all of the candidates, but also we are seeing some really high-profile visits from candidates here in the Lehigh Valley. In Allentown, Tim Walz is going to be stopping by for a campaign visit. So again, I think, all eyes are on our area, and, people are definitely tuned in to this election, which is coming so soon.
Carter, when you look at this year's election, both the primary and the general election, how would you describe the political climate?
Yeah, I would say very tense, obviously. I think voters and candidates as well obviously know that the nation's likely going to come down to Pennsylvania, and everybody's cognizant of that. I think voters have the distinct impression that their vote matters a lot this time around and are taking it very seriously. I mean, you can see that in the number of new voters we have registering to vote. They're out there requesting mail ballots, so I think everybody's anticipating a big turnout, like Borys said.
Borys, you've covered elections for many years. How does the political climate look to you, especially if we look in the primary? President Joe Biden was on the ballot. Now Vice President Kamala Harris is on the ballot. How does the climate look to you?
Well, there's no doubt that there's more enthusiasm on the Democrat side than there was. This is a really hard-fought election. It's a tooth and nail. They're fighting for every vote right now. Every little marginal group they're going after. There's visits everywhere, especially in Pennsylvania. Lindsay mentioned that the Lehigh Valley is getting Tim Walz. We're getting him on Friday. We had Eric Trump here last Thursday for a Republican dinner in Lackawanna County. We got Don Jr. on Saturday up at our ski resort. I'm sure that Kamala Harris and Donald Trump will be back one more time. We had Doug Emhoff here on Monday, and J.D. Vance in Williamsport. So this is going to go on for the next week and a half, right up until Election Day. The one that I see happening at some point is Biden showing up with Harris in different parts of the state, certainly here, I think.
Borys, when these candidates and their representatives are coming into the community, what types of issues are they bringing up? What are they trying to message to the people in the area?
It depends. For example, Harris, when she was here, went after specific issues, trying to Emhoff is trying to get, I should say Emhoff was here on Monday, trying to get Republicans to vote for his wife. He brought along Joe Walsh, the Illinois congressman, and Jeff Duncan, the lieutenant governor of Georgia. So that's been a concerted effort by the Harris campaign to woo some of the Republicans. A lot of them are former Democrats. There's been Luzerne County flipped to Republican voter registration advantage a few weeks ago. So they're trying to get back some of those Democrats, and they need to keep down the margins that Trump has in the rest of the state, because it may not be enough just to win the Southeast and Allegheny County.
I think Borys brings up something very interesting. We've been doing a lot of reporting on that voter registration trend as well, and Republicans have been out-registering Democrats with new voters every single week. Most weeks this year, they're really outpacing Democrats and have shrunk the historic margin that Democrats have had for the past several years by really a lot. In 2020, Democrats were working with about 7.5% advantage over Republicans when they squeaked out an 88,000 vote win. Now that's less than half of that, down around the 3% mark. So Republicans have really been picking up numbers recently.
What we don't know yet is whether or not those are people who are already voting for Republicans and are just decided to change their party. But the Republicans have certainly picked up a lot of votes.
Yeah, that's a good point.
In the last 4 years, that's undoubtedly true. The Democratic advantage in Pennsylvania is the smallest it's been in over 3 decades.
Right.
Lindsay, Borys mentioned the effort of some of the folks coming into the region to try to win over Republican voters for the Democrats. You reported on former U.S. Rep. Charlie Dent, a Republican, endorsing Kamala Harris. How significant is that in your area?
Right. I mean, I think in this area, people see Charlie Dent as sort of someone who represents maybe even like a bygone era of the Republican Party because, he was someone that was a Republican and represented the Lehigh Valley area up until 2018. But he also did break with his party at times to, support more Democratic-backed initiatives, things like repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell. So he's someone that, is seen as moderate and seen as someone that, people, I do feel that people have almost a nostalgic feeling for him in this area. I could see that being significant, but again, with the Republican Party's sort of shift to the right, I don't know how persuasive it will be for people who, do still identify themselves as Republicans. So that's sort of my impression of the impact that could have.
Now, mail-in ballots have been an issue for a few years, as I've been working to try to work out some of the kinks involved in that. One of those was allowing people to correct mistakes on their envelope or with something on the ballot. What are some of the issues there? Notice and cure issues, opening ballots early. What are some of the issues that are surrounding that?
Yeah, so one of the shortcomings of Act 77, the law that gave us universal mail voting in Pennsylvania, is it doesn't really define what happens if a voter makes one of those mistakes. Voters have to sign and date and put their ballot in a secrecy envelope for it to be counted. But if they don't do that, then what happens? Our courts have interpreted that to be, we don't disallow voters to fix those errors, but we don't expressly allow voters to fix those errors. So it's created kind of this patchwork of counties notifying some voters that, hey, your ballot has an error on it, come in and fix it, and some counties don't do that. And this has been fought in the courts for years. The most recent developments on it, actually just yesterday, we got a court decision from the state Supreme Court that said if a voter casts one of those erroneous ballots, they have the right to go into their polling place on Election Day and cast a provisional ballot and have that ballot counted. Now, voters have to still know whether or not they made one of those errors. Some counties will notify them, or there'll be an automatic email from the Department of State that they made an error, and some counties aren't doing that. So we're still going to see a patchwork there. But we might get some more clarity on that here soon enough. There's another court case pending before the state Supreme Court on whether or not counties are required to notify voters when they make a mistake.
So this is just a product of the law itself not being clear enough, and so the counties themselves are generating their own rules about this. That's
right, yeah. And I would say across the board, I hear from county officials, Democrats, Republicans, got an email from Butler County's commissioner last night that they see themselves as between a rock and a hard place. They are trying to follow the law as their solicitors are interpreting it for them. But they really want the legislature to fix this and give them some clarity. I hear from them like, we don't care what the clarity is. If we're not going to cure, that's fine. But tell us that. If we are going to be allowed to cure, that's fine. But tell us that as well. And we've seen the courts say this as well in their decisions that they really need clarity from the legislature.
Borys, one of the big races, of course, this year is the race between U.S. Senator Bob Casey and the Republican candidate, Dave McCormick. Franklin Marshall poll shows this very close. So what is this looking like in your area?
I haven't looked at that breakdown because those breakdowns don't mean much. The margin of errors on those is so large. Casey did not win Luzerne County last time he ran. Lou Barletta, who was from Luzerne County, was on the ballot, so that may have had something to do with it. But he is clearly struggling in areas that used to be Casey territory. The Southeast used to be rock solid Casey. The Northeast used to be rock solid Casey. The Northeast is still much more Casey than the Southeast. He didn't do well there in 2018. It's a really tight race. The interesting thing about the Franklin and Marshall poll, if you look at the numbers, likely voters has a 1-point race, but registered voters has Casey up 7. So the trick for him will be to get those people who didn't say they're likely to vote to the polls so that he can win by a fairly comfortable margin. This is the closest it's been in a Casey election in his four elections so far.
Borys, do you have any sense as to why Casey's losing some support that he had in the past?
I think that he's definitely, part of it is that he's changed his positions over the years. This is definitely a year that is not favorable to Democrats. The way he had fairly favorable conditions when he ran against Santorum in 2006, Tom Smith in 2012, and Lou Barletta in 2018. The 2006 and 2018 elections were midterms where it was a referendum on the incumbent president. So he had very, very favorable conditions. And this is not an election that's favorable to Democrats right now because we're dealing, he's running with the Joe Biden baggage. He'd call it an advantage, but maybe it is, maybe it will be. But that's part of the reason, the Democrats are kind of the incumbent party. They have the White House right now, and they're not seeing, things are not going well in terms of, it's not the same environment that we saw the last three times he ran. That's part of the problem.
Lindsay, with the closeness of the race at this point, this type of thing would usually drive efforts to try to get voters to turn out. Are you seeing the parties really working on that issue?
Oh, certainly. And I think that kind of goes back to Borys's point about what the Democrats really need to do is bring out people that say that they are not likely or are still undecided about whether they are going to vote at all, because the polling is showing not just for Bob Casey, but I also did see this reflected in, I believe, the Franklin and Marshall presidential poll in Pennsylvania, that all registered voters, I think there's around a 4% preference for Kamala Harris over Donald Trump. But when surveying people that are actually likely to vote, it is much, much more close and much, much more split. So we are seeing, both candidates and people targeting those voters that, are still unsure about that decision.
Carter, are we seeing presidential candidates and Senate candidates talking about the same issues, or are there differences between them?
Well, I think definitely the major issue that the Republican candidates have been hitting on has been the economy. Time and time again, right, in elections, that's the number one issue that voters bring up, and it's what I hear when I talk to voters as well. Democrats, I think, have been trying to focus on more of a democracy message. How much that is successful with voters, though, I guess that remains to be seen.
So Borys, Carter mentioned the economy as an issue, and we do see that in some of the polling. Now, unemployment in Pennsylvania is at 3.4%. It has been for a while. How does that play into people's perception of the economy?
I think inflation is the bigger factor because in this new F&M poll, you see almost a third of the voters saying that the economy or their finances are the biggest factor, the biggest problem facing the state today. Unemployment is low, and you wouldn't know it based on that. Inflation has just kind of taken over the election, and I think that's really, what's going to decide it. And Donald Trump still does well on that. I haven't seen McCormick numbers on that front, but again, Casey's the incumbent and has to suffer with that. This is going to be really down to the wire, fighting for every vote right up until election day, and then even then making sure that there's robust efforts to get people that you think will vote for you to the polls. I've not seen one quite like this. The last two were close, but not like this. I mean, there's just an enormous amount of money being spent, over $1 billion in Pennsylvania on the presidential and Senate race alone. That was, everybody was quite impressed in 2008 when Barack Obama raised $1 billion. Well, that's nothing.
And in a report that you had, Borys, you talked about the spending in the 8th Congressional District race as well, where it looks like it's $32.8 million.
$32 million allocated or spent already on the 8th Congressional District race. I've never seen anything like it. I mean, it's wall-to-wall advertising. You sit down in front of the TV. It's rare that you would go a break without 4 straight commercials, sometimes 2 in a row attacking the candidate, sometimes back-to-back, 1 attacking the candidate, 1 praising the candidate. It's just mind-boggling.
Lindsay, with all these ads, do you think that there's a voter fatigue at some point?
I think there certainly is, especially because so much of the advertising is skewing really negative about all of the candidates. And I think we actually saw the impact of that in a poll by Muhlenberg. This was earlier in the month, so I can't say, the extent to which things have changed, but we saw that positive perception of candidates like both Bob Casey and Dave McCormick had decreased from October compared to the polling before that. So I think that, that could be the effect of those really negative skewing ads that we're seeing in our market and, throughout all of the competitive races in Pennsylvania.
Carter, are these ads having the kind of impact that candidates want?
I think that's tough to say. I mean, I think over the past couple of months, I was listening to a show yesterday that, with everything that's been happening, candidates dropping out, Biden, assassination attempts, everything that's happened in the news, we really haven't seen polling shift all that much. So, I mean, if that's not shifting the polling, how much is an ad going to shift it? I think Lindsay's right, though. There probably is a lot of fatigue. I'm not in a particularly competitive congressional district, but still I see one ad after another. So it's kind of inescapable, I think, anywhere you are in PA.
Now, usually during campaign season, we see candidate debates and forums. Lindsay, are you seeing these debates and forums in your area, and are they significant for voters?
Yes. So in the Lehigh Valley's congressional district, that's the 7th, and the race is between the incumbent Democratic Congresswoman Susan Wild and Republican challenger Ryan McKenzie. They did face off in 2 debates in, I want to say, September, the first half of September. So it's actually been a while since, they've had this sort of face-to-face encounter and, kind of talked about their positions on issues, and a lot of the time also attacked their opponent. So it honestly is hard to say what the impact of those has been. And it's actually surprising because I think in 2022, the debates happened a little bit closer to Election Day. So I almost feel like, the impact of those debates could be a little bit decreased just because it's been so long since we saw them kind of face off in that sort of a forum. And instead, maybe what is more top of mind for voters is, all this advertising they're seeing that skews negative about both candidates.
I wondered about that because why, for example, in the 8th Congressional District, Rob Bresnahan, the challenger, who's taking on Matt Cartwright, the Democratic incumbent, wanted to have earlier debates. And the reason he wanted to have earlier debates was because of mail-in voting. When mail-in voting started, they started sending out the mail-in ballots in September. That's why he wanted to have the earlier debate. So I think that the idea of the earlier congressional debates might have something to do with that. The other thing that kind of goes under the radar, but I'm sure that each of us have seen in our own mailboxes, is the absolute blizzard of political literature that's been mailed to people. And a lot of that came as the mail-in ballots went out. You see a lot less of it now. That they were definitely targeting mail-in ballot voters because I had to have received personally more than 25 pieces of mail, and people have been bringing them to me for weeks, and now it's slowed to a trickle.
Borys, talk a little bit more about the 8th Congressional District. This is Representative Matt Cartwright is a Democrat, but Donald Trump has won that district in the past. Tell us a little bit about it.
He's the only Democrat in the country, Democratic incumbent congressman, to have won a Trump district 4 elections in a row. And because it's a Trump district, the Republicans keep thinking they can beat him. So far, they've been wrong. His margins have narrowed from 2018. I think it was 23,000 he won by in 2018, 12,000 in 2020, and 7,000 2 years ago. And all those were climates that were favorable to Republicans or Democrats. This is the first time he's running, just like Casey, in a climate that's unfavorable to Democrats. This makes this one the one, if he's going to lose, this might be the one that he loses. But so far, I think it's still it's a toss-up in a couple of rating services, and still tilts a little Democratic in another. So that will be an interesting race to watch. They've spent, like I said, a ton of money on it.
Carter, one of the issues related to mail-in ballots is not just when they can be opened or when they can be processed, but how they're counted. You wrote about some of the issues surrounding types of machines that are being used in Philadelphia versus Allegheny County. What did you find?
Yeah, that's right. We've been having this conversation for the past 4 years about the fact that the state doesn't have pre-processing of mail ballots before Election Day, and that can cause a delay to the results. I wanted to take a look at really how fast counties could do this and how much they'd improved in the past 4 years. And what I found was something interesting, that Allegheny County is able to count mail ballots much faster than Philadelphia. In 2022, during the midterm elections, they did about 12,000 ballots per hour, where Philadelphia was doing about 5,000. And what I found was that it really came down to the way the two counties had structured their operations. Philadelphia uses some slower ballot opening machines compared to Allegheny County. And Allegheny County just uses a lot more people for the operation as well. But the result of this is that Allegheny feels it's going to be done with their mail ballot counting on Election Day this year, where Philadelphia is still cautioning, hey, it might take us a while. We might run into Wednesday or Thursday. Good news is Philadelphia has opted to use some faster equipment that they purchased over the summer. So that might help that process a little bit. But still, I think it shows that there is a disparity in how quickly these counties can count ballots. And even if we did have pre-processing of mail ballots before Election Day, it wouldn't be a question of whether or not we could finish on Election Day. That would obviously help it a lot. But some counties have figured out the method that they need to get it done on Election Day.
Boris, since a lot of these election issues are managed at the local level, county to county, what are you seeing in the counties in your area as far as how they've attempted to deal with some of these issues?
Well, most of them are small enough that they can get the mail-in ballots counted. The problem lies in the bigger counties. Luzerne has been slow in the past. For example, troubled Luzerne elections department has been slow to get them counted in 2020 or 2022. It took a day or two. Last time wasn't so bad. It took about a day into the day after the election. But 2020, it took several days to get all the ballots counted. But they're getting better. Using faster equipment, and this time around, Luzerne's promising that they're going to stay at it until they're done. So, hopefully in the middle of the night they're going to get done. But that's the biggest issue. Elections directors all over the state will tell you if you give them a couple more days, they'll get it done on time on election night. We'll have timely results. This is totally unnecessary. This change should have happened years ago, after the first time we went through this in 2020. And I'm not sure what the reluctance is to do it. They do it in other states, so why can't we do it in Pennsylvania? Because it would really add a lot to people's faith in the electoral system, which, the doubts that are out there, they shouldn't exist as they are. But that one particular one really hurts.
Yeah, Borys is right. I mean, election directors consistently say, even if they have figured out how to do it on Election Day, it's still an incredible stress for them and just not the best system. Allegheny has to divert a couple hundred people from their normal county jobs, which obviously there's other things a county has to be doing. And I thought something interesting that I saw when we had the debate in Philadelphia between the two presidential candidates. Byron Donalds from Florida was here, and he was basically saying, why doesn't Pennsylvania just do what Florida does? And Florida will start processing their mail ballots before Election Day. Obviously, if counties could do that, then there wouldn't be a question about whether this county or that county is going to finish on Election Day.
Duh. Really, It's just a no-brainer. It's like, come on, Republicans, come on, Democrats, let's get it done.
Right.
Lindsay, what are you seeing about the election management in the region that you cover?
Right. So I'll touch a little bit specifically on Northampton County, because they actually received some national coverage for some of the election problems that they had in 2023. That was a municipal election, but if I'm remembering correctly, there were machines that glitched and showed that people voted for the opposite candidate of the one that they actually voted for. And so they were able to the administrators in Northampton County said that, they were able to notify people that ran into any problems and that it did not impact the outcome of any 2023 elections. And It does seem like they have addressed this issue with their machines. But we have seen, people like Ryan McKenzie kind of point out that issue to sort of cast doubt on what could happen this election, even though, Northampton County election officials are saying that any issues have since been resolved. And so I think, there will be a lot of eyes on Northampton County for more than one reason, because that is, one of the really decisive and split counties in Pennsylvania in terms of voter election results. Sorry.
Borys, we only have a few minutes left. What specific issues will you be looking at over the next week and a half?
Issues, and what do you mean by issues?
What are you going to be watching for as the election unfolds?
You're always looking for the October surprise, the one thing that kind of shifts the election. In 2016, it was Comey's letter saying that he'd reopened the email election. That really was decisive. Something like that, although I find it hard to believe that there will be anything like that, because most of the electorate is quite decided. The polling in each state, everybody's at or near 50. Both sides are at or near 50%. There's very, very few undecided voters. But in a tight election like this, those few undecided voters can matter. And maybe there's something happens that shifts a large enough part of the electorate to one side or the other. I don't foresee that, but this has been quite an interesting election. We've not had an election quite like this one in American history.
Well, our guests have been Carter Walker, a reporter with Votebeat, Lindsay Weber, a reporter with The Morning Call, and Borys Krawczeniuk, a reporter with WVIA. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
And I'm Phil Beckman. Thank you for watching.